Hey, what's going on, everybody? I have Jamey Vinnick here, who covers Washington State for KookFan.com and the 24/7 Sports Network. We're here to talk about Francisco Mauigoa, Miami recent transfer. Jamey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, man. As I mentioned, it's been a long day, but we're going to knock this out. Francisco Mauigoa, a lot of people are obviously excited about his younger brother. He played 2 years at Washington State, linebacker. Just what kind of guy is he? What kind of linebacker is he? What's he kind of bringing to the table in your mind?
Physicality. That is the first thing that stands out with Cisco. He kind of made some noise last year. He didn't play a whole lot at linebacker, did a lot on special teams, but he kind of wowed everybody with how physical he was already. I mean, he was blowing up guys on special teams, and maybe sometimes to a fault, not necessarily in the late hits or the unnecessary roughness, but would sell out for the heavy hit and then would end up whiffing on the tackle. This year, that wasn't the case. He was still bringing the thunder, bringing the heat, but was such a sound tackler. He made a lot of progress and kind of went from a special teamer to backup linebacker to a absolute starting linebacker. Split snaps at Mike with Travion Brown, another Washington State linebacker who transferred, but he was I think the better of the two in my opinion. And he's physical. He can come up. He's deadly in the pass rush, 3.5 sacks from that linebacker spot. He is a truly a unique linebacker that he can do a little bit of everything. The coverage is getting there. It was better this year than it maybe was last year and got better throughout the season, but I wouldn't call him a coverage linebacker. He's kind of more of your, in the box, on the line, or, hunting down a running back rather than dropping a coverage and cover a tight end or cover a receiver.
So he's a guy listed at 6'3", 230, looks all of it, that kind of a guy. You touched on something that I really like in players when they make jumps and whatever role they're in, they be productive. And I saw that he led the team actually in special teams tackle that first year. So whatever role he's in, I like when guys excel in that role, and then he takes that jump in his role and he produces. So that's always good to see with players young, whatever they are in their careers. What do you think allowed him to kind of make that jump? What did he get better at as a linebacker from year one to year two?
Well, I think with a guy like Cisco is he was fairly ready physically when he got to Washington State. And sometimes, when you see guys take longer, they've got to develop physically. They come in and they're playing linebacker, they're 185 pounds. I mean, he came in and was already a solid, I think, 215, 219, 220, and had all the physical tools. And I think from there, it was just getting his understanding of the game. And he's talked about his eyes. He talked about his eyes all year, getting his eyes right and working on his eyes and his pursuit and his angles. I just think that is kind of what helped him get to that next level. It's just kind of a year of maturation. I don't know if there was anything crazy that he did or that the coaches did. They just found a really talented player and a guy who was already at the physical level to play Power 5 football. And they just got him to the mental side and the X's and O's side. So I think it was more of a kind of a general maturity, general development more than anything of, he went into the lab this year and did this or did that. And he worked hard and he, a tireless worker, but it wasn't like he spent his entire offseason doing one thing or putting on 30 pounds and that's what helped him succeed. I think it was just a kind of a bunch of different things and a gradual understanding of what his role was and what he needed to do to play linebacker at the Power 5 level.
So he had 60 tackles, 5.5 for loss. You touched on the 3.5 sacks. I'm curious your thoughts, the 3 forced fumbles, the interception. Can you walk me through that and kind of explain to people what that was like to see him pick that ball off and then return it? What that kind of, you're touching on his physical attributes, but for a guy that size to be able to do something like that, what impressed you about that play in particular this past year?
It's funny. I'm usually in the press box for games, but for the first half of that game, I was on the sideline. So happens on the opposite sideline. I see Bo Nix, the Oregon quarterback, kind of roll out and throw to the flat, which had been money for Oregon at that point, and see Cisco jumping and kind of see him take off down the sideline. And my first thought is, all right, let's go, big play. He'll get 20 yards, 25 yards out of this. Then I see a flag come down. I'm like, all right, this is all coming back anyways, either for a block in the back or for something. And then he just keeps running, and I keep waiting for him to get pushed out or for him to slow up, and he just never does. And, you turn and suddenly he's 95 yards into the end zone. Flag ends up being on Oregon. And it was just kind of I didn't know what to think. It was shocking to see him move like that. It's not that he didn't have speed, but to go 95 yards, and he got some blocks in there to help him, but that was not something that I don't think anyone expected him to have in his game. I don't even know if he thought he could go 95 for a touchdown, but no, it was a huge play, and Washington State wasn't able to pull that game out. Had a couple breakdowns late, but at that point, it was a huge moment in the game, and he had a knack for some big moments. I mean, he had some big forced fumbles, or you needed a special teams hit. He had one for you, so he had his moments and had some big games.
Jamey, can you explain maybe a little bit about his role in that defense? It looked like they were running the 4-2-5. Is that what they were doing? And then maybe his role, and that's what Miami. It's interesting. Miami ran a 4-2-5, so I'm curious if that's what Washington State was doing this past year, and obviously if it is, the transition should be pretty seamless for him.
Yeah, it was a 4-2-5, and he was playing the Mike linebacker position. As I mentioned, was kind of rotating with Travion Brown, so they would each get about 30 to 35 snaps a game. And his role was kind of, again, more of that, the pass rusher, the stay at home on the run game. He did drop into coverage. They had him cover, but it wasn't his primary role. I mean, if they were dropping their linebackers into coverage, that was often where Deion Henley or Travion Brown would do that. They just had a little more speed and a little more coverage instincts, but he was kind of more of your box linebacker, downhill, stick the ball carrier than kind of the guy who's going to go out and stay, step for step with receivers. He could, and he did do it at times, but it just wasn't exactly what they asked of him.
Certainly different players between him and Henley, just different style, the whole thing. But is there anything in particular you think that maybe he could learn from Henley, just kind of watch it, playing with him and maybe take moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, Deion's tough because he's just such a freak specimen. I mean, a guy who was a returner and a receiver in his first couple of years. So I think a lot of what Henley was able to do at Washington State came because he is just an unbelievable athlete. But I do think that there is something, that Mauigoa can learn in the leadership department. And, he's a quieter guy, and Deion's about as exuberant of a personality as there is. So I think you started to see it rub off a little bit. Francisco became a little more vocal, a little more talkative towards the end of the season. And I think that's one of the things that I think Henley could have maybe provided for him, is giving him that voice and that leadership to be in the middle of a defense, because you have to be able to talk. I mean, you don't have to necessarily be, the loudest guy in the world, but you have to be able to communicate. And I do think that improved for him throughout the year. He maybe didn't have that at first, was, a little shy or a little reserved, but became a little more vocal and became a better communicator as the year went on.
And maybe this is just piggybacking off what you just talked about, but maybe next step, we touched on earlier, the step he made from year 1 to 2. What's kind of next for him? Is it more of what you're saying with maybe the leadership thing, or what do you think he can do and kind of really bring as he continues his career here for getting ready for year 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think the leadership's a big thing. He's never going to be the guy who's, in the middle of the huddle screaming and yelling. That's just not him. He's going to be a lead by example guy, and that's just kind of his personality. He's, again, like I said, he's a little more low key, kind of a little quieter, but he'll be a lead by example type guy. I think the tackling it still has another step to go. It was much better, and it was, I would say, solid this year. But for him to become as good as he can be, the tackling does have to improve a little bit. He still missed 9 tackles this year. And then I think the big thing is he does have to get a little bit better in coverage. I mean, he gave up 23 catches this year. Didn't drop into coverage a ton. So I do think there has to be a little bit more of an emphasis on his ability to drop into coverage and make those plays. And then I think it's just consistency. I mean, there would be games where he looked like the best player on the field, and then there'd be a game where you kind of didn't notice him so much. And some of that was the rotation, and some of that was just how a game script went. But I think the consistency for him, that's the next step, because he's a guy who has the potential to be an 100 tackle, 7.5, 8.5 tackle for loss guy, and an all ACC type player.
Just kind of interesting background, but just anything in the recruiting that you remember, again, comes out in this class here, 3-star recruit, with 2021 there. Is there anything in particular you remember about him as a recruit? Did the staff feel like they had a good one in him at the time?
Yeah, I think he was a guy that, when it comes to Washington State, they don't get a lot of high recruits. It's a lot of 3 stars, and a lot of times you're looking at who else has offered him. And if you have a couple other Power 5 offers, all right, that's good. Mauigoa was a guy who didn't. He had a couple Mountain West offers, Hawaii, San Jose State, Utah State, and then Army and a handful of FCS schools. But I don't think anyone really turned kind of bat an eye at taking him, because his older brother played at Washington State and was very good. Washington State's had a lot of success in the past. taking Samoan kids, taking Polynesian kids, and turning them into these very, very under the radar, but very good players. The guy that everyone points to is Frankie Louvu, who flew under the radar at Washington State, was just kind of a guy, or was great there, goes undrafted, is now a star with the Panthers. So there were a lot of similarities. A lot of people pointed to Louvu as a comparison for Mauigoa in how they played the game and how their styles kind of compared. And I think he started to show a lot of that this year, especially. So when he got recruited, it was everyone kind of, gave a chuckle like, all right, another Mauigoa here. There was obviously a lot of jokes of, oh, maybe you get the third brother. No one ever thought that was feasible at Washington State to get Francis. But, I think there was a lot of people excited because even if he didn't have the offer list or didn't have the pedigree that maybe Washington State likes to try and at least get to some degree, he had the name, he had the background, and he had, the tape that suggested, yeah, this guy's going to be able to come in and play. And he never looked like a long-term project. And the way Jake Dickert talked about him back when he was the DC and the linebackers coach made it very clear that they thought they had found something really special. And there really wasn't ever a thought about redshirting him. He was going to come in and play.
Yeah, and no doubt, with Francis, a lot of excitement with him. To me, and obviously, the way you're speaking about him, the way he's been productive, he's not just Francis's brother. This is a guy that should come in right away, be an immediate impact player, especially because Miami has a dire need at linebacker play. So I'm expecting big things, and I think Miami fans and the coaches certainly are as well. Jamey, your time is very valuable. I appreciate you taking the time to drop some knowledge here on Cisco.
Yep, anytime, no problem.